Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Kasey Jones. I'm with BetterGrowth, and I'm here with Kevin Hall of Ripcord. And it's 11 a.m. We're Pacific time, 2 p.m. if you're on the east side. We're just going to and we're seeing a ton of people kind of logging on right now. So we're going to give everybody just a few more minutes to log on, get situated. Tell us in the comments kind of where you're joining us from, what makes robotics and AI interesting to you, or if you're going through a digital transformation or thinking about it in your organization. We hear why you're interested in this topic, and if you've got any specific questions. Our goal is definitely to make sure that this conversation is not only informative, but lively and interactive. So definitely share your questions. Let us know kind of what makes this an interesting and compelling topic for you. And Mark, thank you for letting us know. As some of you may know, we had a couple technical difficulties last time around, so we have worked very hard to smooth those out. We keep making the joke that it's really, really unfortunate that the robots can't just manage the whole webinar process for us, but unfortunately we are not there technologically yet. I think there was a little human error last time around, but hopefully we have solved that. But definitely let us know if there's any issues that crop up. And yeah, like I mentioned in the chat window, share your questions or any relevant thoughts on the topic.
And stealing my thunder on slide 5. We were going to talk about robots for webinars.
Yeah. Right. I feel like that's the next frontier.
Yeah. Maybe a couple webinars down the road.
Right. It's webinars and video conferencing, where that's one of those like technologies where we all feel like we should be a little bit more advanced, but pretty much every time I get it on a video conference, there's some sort of technical issue, but that's a problem for somebody else to solve, I think.
Yep, for sure.
So we'll leave just maybe one more minute before we will get started. And like I mentioned, during this conversation, if anyone out there has questions or there's some part of digital transformation that you are struggling with or dealing with or thinking about, definitely let us know. Kevin has an unbelievably impressive background, and I think can speak very, very intelligently to a lot of the issues surrounding digital transformation and the challenges that a lot of companies face in kind of pushing those movements forward in their own organizations. So let us know how during this conversation we can kind of help all of you. So I think, without further ado, I think we will get started. So welcome everybody to the role of robotics and AI with Kevin Hall, the CTO of Ripcord. We're going to be talking about all things digital transformation, and particularly this kind of the union of hardware and software. I think often in the technology space, we get really, really focused on one or the other, but we certainly are seeing a lot more products and technologies that are really bridging this gap in a really smart way. I think Tesla would be a really great example, but I want to start things off with just having Kevin tell us a little bit about his background. So Kevin, when I first found out a little bit about your background and your expertise in robotics, I was completely blown away. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got into robotics and some of the really, really interesting jobs that you've had in the space.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for, I guess, the introduction, and super excited to be on the webinar here to talk about Ripcord and some of the technology we've been building. So a little bit about me. So I'm coming up on my 4th year here at Ripcord. So I joined a while back and helped kind of co-found the company. Before that, around 10 years in the robotics industry. I've worked at 4 different robotics companies, 3 of them being startups, and pretty early on got kind of focused in on industrial robotics and computer vision systems, and combining the 2 of those things together to make things and build things in factories. Kind of that fascination grew when, I think if you go to your first factory or first few, you really start to understand that, for everyone on this webinar, if you look at the desk in front of you or around you, pretty much everything you see is made in a factory by some kind of machine. And the scale of that, which I still can't really wrap my head around, just fascinated me. So kind of grew a passion around that, and most of my work product was around programming industrial robotics and computer vision systems to solve different applications around the world. A lot in the electronic space, food industry, a number of different things. I was very fortunate to be able to kind of travel around and see how things are made and help make those processes more efficient. When I first started in the field, it was more in the ground vehicle space, but kind of quickly moved into industrial. So yeah, then 4 years on at Ripcord here, really have focused on kind of that first pillar of ours, which is the robotic digitization, which I'm excited to talk more about today, and how that helps with digital transformation. So
absolutely, I think that's it's always really fascinating for me anyway, to hear where that idea first sparked. Right. And I think we all have those moments, or hopefully we all have those moments in our careers where you realize that there's something your brain can't quite wrap around and really wants to, and that becomes sort of the compelling thing that you pursue. And so I do think that's a really fascinating perspective, and one that a lot of people don't pay attention to, right? That practically everything around us is made by machines, and we very rarely get insight into that process. Let alone the actual technology that goes into making those machines. So I'm curious, given kind of where you were, what prompted you to kind of join the Ripcord journey and kind of be a part of this really compelling technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me it was a number of things. I think the overall, it didn't take long for me to. It took like a matter of minutes of talking to Alex to wrap my head around the mission and what we were trying to accomplish and the size of that challenge. I think the idea, kind of that spark that Ripcord had 4 years ago at this point, was looking at the record storage business. There's billions of boxes of paper sitting in warehouses that companies, governments, people have stored and put there for a reason. And when you sit down and think about it, like why was all of this content going into warehouses? You soon realize that it's because the state of the art in digitization and the ability to convert that content to be digital just wasn't good enough. It wasn't able to handle that scale, that scope, and deliver that as that service to people that really need it. So what ended up happening is you have all of this useful information that companies have decided to store, going into an archive, into a warehouse, where it's not particularly searchable. It's very difficult to access. And this that idea clicked for me instantly. So kind of that vision and that mission of being able to build automation to help give access, or give customers and companies access to their information by pushing that state of the art forward was a super exciting idea for me. Kind of secondly, the challenge and the scope of what we were trying to accomplish. I think most engineers I've met really like a good challenge, a hard technical problem, and yeah. We'll get into this a little bit later, but it's a pretty amazing challenge that we many of the hurdles we've made it over the last couple of years, and many more that we're still trying to tackle. When you think about the amount of variation that's out there in content and being able to digitize it, it's a pretty kind of grand scale challenge in many ways. So that's fascinating. And then I think lastly would be the I came across a lot of opportunities, I guess, when I was selling systems or working, to get customers to buy robots from us. And you rarely came across an opportunity that would buy, dozens or hundreds of robots. And you kind of build a thick skin to those sorts of pie in the sky opportunities. And what Ripcord's doing, we actually have an opportunity to build hundreds and thousands of these machines for ourselves, which is very unique. Lots of people build machines and sell them, but to build automation and robots for your own use at that scale is really exciting, because there's some great technology you can build around that. So I think a combination of those things really hooked me, and it was a clear decision to come join and build this thing.
So I think that's super fascinating, and I'm curious. You said something that made me want you to expand just a little bit. Okay, when you think about being able to build tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of robots and use them in-house, what are some of the sort of technological advantages or some of the sort of next level evolution of that technology that you have in mind? Like, what is the possibility that having all of those machines in one place kind of enable?
Yeah, in today's world of kind of IoT, Industry 4.0, we can get there's really interesting things we can do having this, viewing our robots as a fleet of systems, and this networked set of devices that can share information, learn from one another. You can start doing things like real-time optimizations and improvements to increase your efficiencies or optimize your work, your processes to produce more quickly or get better accuracy. There's some really interesting things that Ripcord's investing in because we have this fleet that if we were just selling these machines kind of one or two at a time, you wouldn't ever need to invest in that. So there's some interesting opportunities there for us to build technology that we're super excited about.
That's really, really interesting. And thank you for that. So, okay, so I know you put together some slides kind of about robotics and AI, but also sort of the evolution of the space. And so maybe you can kick us off by kind of walking us through this whole digital transformation, but also digitization space and how robotics and AI are really shaping the landscape there.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great. So today I think we'll dive in and talk about Ripcord's technology, how we're enabling digital transformation, and then focus in, for today in this webinar, at least a little more in on the digitization technology, and talk about reasons why this is important to our customers and why we see this as the future for any digital transformation process that involves paper and digital content.
Yeah.
All right, let me go to the next slide. So back in 2015, when we were founded, if you think about what was the state of technology, and we got into this a little bit. You have document prep, which is done with hand tools. Seriously, the claw that you can buy at Staples to remove staples was state-of-the-art technology, and there's a couple of different variations of that. But people removing staples and what's typically called document prep. Scanning technology, there's some pretty cool high-speed scanners out there, but all of them require a single sheet with no fasteners and pretty much all the paper has to be isolated. And indexing is done or was done pretty much manually with some automation, but primarily you have people at a station typing in information about the records they see. And the combination of these things were all coming from different vendors. So, it was an integration challenge. Let's piece together these different pieces. And if we want to scale, you just scale with people. So you throw more people at the process. And you start to learn that this was just a stuck space from a technology point of view. It had been the same way, just with scanners getting a little bit faster for over a decade. And you start to really see why paper was just flowing into warehouses by the millions of boxes every year, because the state of the art just can't deal with the scale that we're looking to accomplish. So there's a couple things to think about when you think about how this has traditionally been done, and this is still what any other kind of service provider will do today. They'll use these exact same tools.
Yeah.
There's this constant sacrifice of quality for speed, because it's time consuming and expensive to digitize in this way. So to go faster, unfortunately, companies actually degraded the quality of their paper, making decisions to go to black and white content or lower DPI content, which actually makes it of a lower quality than the previous or than the paper itself.
I didn't realize that, actually. That never occurred to me that people would make those choice. And it totally makes sense that they would make that choice to make the process move a little bit faster, that they would degrade the quality. But that's something that I hadn't even thought about. That's a really, really interesting point.
Yeah, and there were some technology reasons for that if we go, 10, 15 years back. But even today, it's a speed trade-off. If you want to go fast and have a more competitive price, you're almost forced to degrade the quality of service. And from a future-proofing point of view, this is a huge problem because this is your one shot to create a copy of that record that will stand the test of time. And one of our, and we'll get into this in a little bit, one of our, I think, core drivers is that shouldn't happen. We should preserve the content as in the highest possible quality for use today with interesting services for data enrichment or in the future. So I show this picture on the top right.
That's why I was laughing when this slide popped up.
Internships actually, or jobs, was actually in a mailroom digitizing paper. I mean, so many people have had this experience, and it's a process that's easy to just turn on autopilot and kind of check out, and there's errors, and the humans in the loop at every step.
Yeah.
So we asked ourselves, is this as good as it gets? Like, is this the state of the art for the future? Are we just going to keep filling up warehouses? Is this as good as it gets for digitization? And fast forward a few years, we took that challenge head on, and built automated robotic machines in a factory from the ground up that's just behind this wall, where we have dozens of machines processing and digitizing paper, and a whole set of workflows and workstations to do this with kind of the utmost quality. We're super excited to have this capacity and this ability to deliver this service. And I think it takes one tour of the factory floor, which we do many of for customers, to really understand that this is just in a different ballpark.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have gotten the demo of the robots, and it's pretty astounding to watch them at work. And I assumed it would be loud and hot, and but it's not. It every step feels very, very state of the art and super impressive. And I think one of the things that we have talked about it quite a bit is the fact that a lot of these old records, for a lot of companies and organizations and governmental entities, you've got old documents too, and they're fragile. And you also don't want to be in a position where you're ruining those or destroying those in any real way. And that's the other thing that I think is super impressive about the machines that you've built, is that they're also super careful with any kind of fragile or sort of degraded material.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We'll get into some of that in a little bit. I think a couple other interesting things to note. When you look down this row of machines, we're actually able to operate all of these pieces of equipment with only a few people. So you kind of break out of that throw more people at the problem sort of mode, and it's more let's throw more machines at the problem, and also leverage software. Every part of our factory has been built from the ground up with software we developed to integrate all of our systems and processes together, and that becomes really powerful for scaling and a number of other things that we'll get into. So we didn't stop there from a vision point of view. There's kind of these three pillars that Ripcord brings together, all from under our umbrella. robots being the first, which we'll talk more about today. Software bots or recognition services for data enrichment is absolutely critical. We think this is the future for any digital transformation project, where, for the last few years, OCR is kind of that table stakes feature where everything gets, OCR'd and you get full text search. We think in the future, pulling more actionable and useful data out of the records will really be the key. So that's the second kind of pillar of our technology. And the third is the repository. So making these records accessible quickly and easily with powerful search tools to our customers. So Ripcord does this end-to-end content pipeline all with our technology. And we're able to provide these advanced capabilities primarily because we do all three together. And there's a specific benefit to being able to horizontally leverage data that you pick up throughout this workflow, whether it's how people use and access the content in the repository, information and metadata that we pick up during digitization, and then of course the enrichment services that we have in the middle. It's really powerful to have this all done by under the same platform of technologies that can share and leverage this information in different ways.
Yeah, so in my view, this is the most compelling part of what Ripcord does. I think we're all really familiar with, the kind of scanning and transitioning from lots of paper documents to digital, but it's basically just one storage method to another. It's not actually making those documents useful. And that's the thing that I think Ripcord really does so tremendously well, is that all of a sudden it's not just, okay, now there's another static document that is just in a digital format. It's almost kind of bringing to life the data and the information that is in all of these records so that you can use it to power your business, to become more efficient, all of these other things. And that to me is the cliche term, the game changer about the technology, is it's not just transitioning your storage method, it's actually unlocking all of this sort of hidden data and information in a way more usable format.
Yep, that's exactly right. So so I think what we wanted, or what I want to do for at least today's webinar is talk a little bit more about the question of why robots specifically, and how using this technology benefits the downstream processes around recognition, repository, or some other system or workflow that your company may have. It all starts with the robots and the way that we ingest this content. So I think this is a question we actually get a lot. Why robots?
Yeah.
They're cool, they're interesting, they're unique, but why does this matter to customers?
Yeah.
I want to talk about that today. So there's really two. For us, it's pretty simple. There's two kind of high-level reasons why. The first being quality of the output. So our output from our facility and our work cells are documents, images that we've digitized and then added metadata to turn them into documents. The quality of that output is directly correlated to the value you can get out of it when you run enrichment services, whether it's through Ripcord or other partners or technology you may have or want to use in the future. Having the best possible quality starting point is critical. And that's from a number of points of view. Image quality is one thing. We can scan up to 1,000 DPI without sacrificing speed at all. So we'll run the same at 600 DPI as we do at 1,000 DPI. So leverage, and that's important for some use cases, not all, but you're able to align yourself with the best possible image quality. Also, the metadata layer is really unique to Ripcord. So we create essentially a digital twin of the content you send to us. What that means is when you send us a box of paper that's filled with file folders and different types of paper and binders, we use technology in our systems to basically allow you to replicate that entire structural makeup of your box, which becomes really interesting when you start trying to find records in a big data set, and also start to look for relationships that could be helpful for enrichment services. So, the old term is garbage in, garbage out. We're kind of the opposite. If you want the best possible data enrichment and the most value out of your records, you want to align with the best possible quality, which hands down is coming out of these machines and our processes. And then kind of the more obvious benefit is scale and speed. I think of robots. So I think by centralizing this into a manufacturing facility where we have dozens of these machines running multiple shifts per day, I think the days of waiting many months or even years sometimes to complete digitization projects is going to pretty much be over. When a customer makes the decision to digitize because they want access to these records, we can deliver that within hours of content showing up at the facility, and we can take on big digitization projects that previously would have taken other vendors using the kind of previous state of the art of hand tools and high-speed scanners. We can do that in a fraction of the time. So those two things combine, the quality and the scale and speed that we can get these results in front of in front of the customer, and so they can start leveraging that data. That's why robots. That's why we do it. Get the content into the best quality and then deliver it quickly.
That's super helpful, and I'm curious. So I think what you were describing about the value and the sort of power of the metadata is particularly interesting. It's the kind of thing that, from an abstract sense, I think pretty much anybody can understand how that extra sort of layer of information could be valuable. However, I feel like most of us learn best when it comes to sort of stories. So do you have a particular use case or a particular way that a company or an organization going through digital transformation, or I don't know, in a different situation entirely, where that metadata would be particularly useful?
Sure. Yeah. So it's kind of a standard part of our service. So the way that customers end up, kind of the most basic example would be in the way that they're able to access the records and organize records. So by tracking all of this structural metadata within the box and any information that we glean out of the content, everything from who shipped the box, where it came from, what was on the shipping manifest, all of this can be leveraged to help companies structure the content the way they want in their repository. And then we're also working on some really interesting ways to search based on that. So if you knew that I always put this record on the left pane of a folder and I tape it to it, you'd be able to search based on that to find what you're looking for.
Oh, wow.
Really, the benefit of this, though, for customers is in some ways more behind the scenes. It's the relationships that we're building between records and the content. So when you perform a keyword search or a faceted search within our repository, you have the highest likelihood of getting a value or a return that makes sense. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes there that relies heavily on the structure. So
that's super helpful. I think one of the things that people often worry about when making the transition from a manual sort of paper analog process to a fully digital one is that you're going to lose really critical steps that a human was doing at each step along the way. And I think that example that you just gave of, look, if I always put this one particular sheet or form or bit of information taped to the left side of a file folder, the ability to know that you're going to be able to kind of, in a digital capacity, sort of mimic that process is super helpful, because I think that's maybe sometimes a blocker for companies that are making this transition.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And when we open, every box that we receive is there's been a lot of investment that went into organizing that content in the way it's organized. And unfortunately, sacrifices companies were forced to make for speed and cost reasons caused them to have, in the past, to decide to just forego that structure and organize things in more of a flat way. And this isn't some customers, and what we hope for is it's just a keyword. You perform a search query, and just like Google, you find what you're looking for in that first result set. So we're hoping to kind of remove the reliance on that structure eventually. and have it be more behind the scenes. But for certain customers, it's a really useful feature. So
very cool.
Okay, so kind of talking one level deeper about what were the major hurdles we had to get over to apply robotics to this space. Really gets into when we think of our factory floor technology, the biggest area where machine learning has made a major difference and enabled us to do what we're able to do. So when you think about, if we can all like transport to think about being in a Staples, you're walking down the paper aisle or the document stapler aisle or fastener aisle. There's so many different types of and shapes and sizes of paper collection or items like folders and binders and portfolios, and then fasteners like rubber bands, paper clips, binder clips. It's incredibly unstructured, and you think about billions of boxes out there, trillions of sheets. There's so like an unfathomable amount of combinations of these items that make up content, and all content that's created today as well is coming in with different types of combinations of these things. So what we call that is unstructured content, and anyone that's worked with computer vision systems before or in automation, you typically know that when it's unstructured, it's a huge challenge for automation. Most facility or most manufacturing lines you'll see or machines have a finite number of inputs that are pretty well known, like the same part or widget is coming through this machine, or the same, apples are coming through, and they're like generally they look the same and their size varies a little bit. But to build automation that can deal with this amount of unstructured content efficiently was the main challenge we had to solve. And I'm so proud of what the team's been able to do today, where we initially started with more traditional techniques in machine vision, and quickly realized we needed to pivot towards a deep learning approach. And it's been fascinating to see the results we've had with this perception engine that's able to tell our automation what's in front of it, which is the first step. The second step, of course, is to have the equipment and the machinery that can process it and know what to do or do the right thing. And that's where the robot comes into play, because and the other pieces of equipment, which are more inherently flexible. So why is this important? This is what enables us to deliver on the quality, speed, and scale that I mentioned before. And this is why this hasn't been done before, because it's an incredible challenge to deal with this sort of unstructured content. So we've made it over that hurdle, and it's really amazing to see our systems chomp through this, Staples, small sheets, or sheets of all sizes, and different pieces of content in such a disciplined way. Okay.
Yeah, and like we talked about, I think it's the access to the unstructured content that I think sort of blows people's minds the most, because that feels like a problem we didn't know there was a solution for until very, very recently, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And to use an industry term, this is most of what we did with the machine is automated the prep process. So typically this was heavily manual. It took many, many hours, especially if you wanted to track the structure of the box or the content that came your way. So we automated that process, which is why we are where we are today.
Yeah.
And sorry for any anxiety caused by looking at these pictures. A couple of years ago, I would have looked at this and just started sweating or something. But today we're much more comfortable seeing these types of stacks of paper.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a legitimate solution to these issues, which is exciting. And I think one of the challenges, honestly, at this point is that for so long, so many people really felt like there was no solution. It was, you're just going to grind your way through it and it's not going to be that good. So the fact that this, something like Ripcord exists is pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, great. All right, so I talked a little bit, oops, sorry, going backwards. Talked a little bit about flexibility. So just a quick story that I really get excited by. So every box that shows up from at our facility from different customers, we open it, and usually we're seeing something new that we haven't seen before. I didn't know that there was paper out there in mass that was longer than like 14 inches or legal size. But we actually came across in the oil and gas industry content called well logs, which are kind of extra long format documents that are anywhere from 10 to 50 plus feet long. So, first thing we did was we went online and found, the best well log scanner you can buy. And we bought a few of them and started processing and immediately discovered that this type of hardware was just as stuck, if not more, than the previous kind of technology for scanning regular paper. So one of our engineers had the smart idea of, well, what happens if we put it on the machine, put it on the robot? And that first well log we scanned fed through beautifully, restacked itself at the other end. And we realized, like, wow, that was an eye-opening experience, that the flexibility of automation, which is one of the main benefits of using robots in other use cases, can actually be applied to paper content as well. So we didn't know it at the time, but we actually now are able to scan well logs 9 or 10 times faster than kind of the previous industry standard, which is we're getting a lot of that content from the oil and gas space. And I think it's an awesome example of when you have this centralized capability and this flexible automation, we're able to, as we get more content through the facility, instead of having to throw people at the problem, which is what the gut instinct was to do, and what anyone else would do, any other provider, we're able to use technology to continue to push that state of the art forward. So we see a lot of other opportunities for this, and this was a particular story that I thought was fun.
It's pretty amazing that the robot could do things that you didn't know it could, which of course, fuels all sorts of disaster fantasies about how they're just going to take over everything. But we'll hope that you've also sort of built them to be, I don't know, benign to us in the future. But we got a really, really good question from Gianmarco, who he also mentioned that he's joining us from the London airport, which we very much appreciate. But he asked, is Ripcord leveraging any specific open source technology or platform across the whole production chain? So recognize, extract, elaborate, transform, store, and serve. So for both the metadata and source content.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we've grown through the last couple of years, there's been a mixture of open source tools that we've leveraged for everything from OCR to some other capabilities to kind of understand what for image processing and some of those areas. And in almost every case, we've landed on building our own software to do this, because we're able to, we have so much unique capability in terms of the information we have and the certain quality that we have from our imaging systems, that we found there was a great opportunity to build technology and really continue to round out that end-to-end solution. So there's definitely technologies we rely on today that are open source for different parts of the workflow, but nothing. Not too much related to this part of digitization.
That's cool. Thank you. And good question.
Okay, cool. So just one slide here, a little verbose, but just to kind of highlight some of the advantages of Ripcord's approach to digitization. Specifically, some of these are more geared on the imaging side. We already talked about the centralized high volume capability. That's probably one of the biggest changes. We want to be able to shorten the time it takes for you to get access to your content, whether small projects or big. We generate a digital twin of the content structure, image at 1,000 DPI without sacrificing speed, which is really the biggest thing. Every sheet is inspected by an ML vision engine. So we look at every single sheet, we classify, we find its size, we find its shape, we look for any fasteners like staples and other things. Once we pick a sheet and we transfer it onto our scanner, there's over 50 sensors that are used per sheet or checked per sheet to guarantee that content gets scanned. And there's some very strict rules in place to that'll stop everything if anything's out of tolerance. So that's very unique compared to a traditional kind of people-based process. Kasey was getting at this a little earlier. We actually don't pinch the paper ever through the process. There's no pinch points. I think the biggest gap it goes through is a few millimeters, the smallest gap it goes through. And this is really great for handling all content types, different thicknesses, different qualities of paper. This becomes really, really important for handling. And kind of in a somewhat selfish way, we didn't want to have to deal with paper jams, which if you've ever had to clear a jam out of a scanner, one of the main reasons that happens is because you pinch the paper. So that was like one of our early on design requirements. We said we don't want to have to dig into the machine and clear paper jams. So
yeah, I think most of us that are at least old enough have had at least like one afternoon in our working history where we spend like 3 hours trying to fix a paper jam in some giant printer or scanner. So yeah, I think that is a very wise decision. Save us all a lot of headaches.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you see some of the content that runs through our machines with dog ears and rips and tears and folds and those sort of things that would have caused a huge problem through a normal scanner that they are able to go through because we don't pinch the content. So it handles it gently and it doesn't stop, which is pretty important for the throughputs we want to achieve. Because we control the end-to-end software and almost the majority of that software stack and process is developed by Ripcord. We have really robust controls around encryption and how we handle our images, which is incredibly important from a security point of view, and chain of custody. We know everything that happened to the content from the time it gets picked up to be delivered, and then down to the sheet level, we track almost every event that happens to the content. Who was handling it, what sort of actions were taken per record. And then where it was delivered and continuing to track who accesses it, how it was shared. So that complete chain of custody is really only something you can do if you control all of the end-to-end solution. So kind of a unique part of Ripcord. And then another area we leverage machine learning on the factory floor is for quality control. We found that this existing tools out there for things like blank detection or auto rotation and those sort of things weren't as good. They were causing a lot of extra QA work for us where we had to go through and manually fix these things. So we trained up some machine learning models that are able to just do this fundamentally better and give us much higher levels of accuracy at determining what needs to be looked at and what doesn't need to be looked at, and really beefed up our capability. So
it's very cool.
All right, so I guess before we get into talking maybe a little more about the future, just maybe any questions. I don't know if now would be the time for questions. This is my last slide, so we can start diving into questions, or we can talk a little bit about the future.
So I think what would be super helpful, you've shared a couple, I think that your example about the oil well logs and that 50-foot document was really helpful. What are some of the other use cases that Ripcord is seeing as being really relevant right now? Because again, like I mentioned, I think we can all understand from sort of an abstract or theoretical sense how valuable this could be. But oftentimes it takes hearing those kind of stories or those real world cases to help us kind of connect the dots of how this can apply for our own organizations or, situations that colleagues or partners that we have are going through. So what would be some of the top or the most common use cases that where you feel like this is there's a real opportunity to kind of change the way an organization is doing business?
Yeah, great question. I think for us, where we're seeing probably the most kind of uptick and traction is in to some of the why robots question I asked earlier, content that fits that bill, where companies have a business process or content that they are generating or that are part of some workflow that they need to accomplish, where speed and the quality of your output, so that you can then leverage data extraction, auto classification, and more advanced functionalities that are in this middle tier of our middle pillar for us around recognition. That's where we're seeing the most pickup, because our ability to deliver quality results with speed are directly, you get the best of both worlds. And the use cases we're seeing are things like content where we want to extract valuable information out of it to be used for some downstream process, whether that's in many cases text-based. I want to pull words out like names or addresses or dollar amounts, whether there's a signature or not. These sort of use cases to inform downstream kind of line of business systems, or more. And we've seen some really interesting like kind of big data and analytics work, and specifically in oil and gas, where they're going through old content and wanting to digitize with the highest quality to then extract value and look for opportunities to look for more oil. So they're using these images and these records to extract data out and valuable insights to lead to a business outcome for them, which is really lucrative. So there's a lot of those types of use cases are, anytime you want to extract information, Ripcord's ability to deliver that end-to-end solution at scale is really powerful.
That's super helpful. And we got a great question from Brian Boyd. He's asking, where are the documents stored? So if it's on Ripcord's cloud solution, can a Ripcord customer actually store them on their cloud solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our repository today is called Canopy, and that's built on AWS. But absolutely, like we have customers have a lot of established systems and infrastructure that we're able to connect to and build integrations with, many of which will come out of the box for the more common and popular systems out there. But absolutely, we engage with customers every day to help connect data to their systems. The documents are one thing, but the actual data is really what a lot of our customers are after. So.
Yeah, super helpful.
Yeah, we're very supportive of our customers in that way and helping them leverage the content. And our repository is a great way for them to access those records, but not the only way.
Yeah, and I do think that's one of the cool things about what Ripcord, like the model, is it kind of meets you where you are. So no matter what type of document it is, where it is, whether it's digital or analog, but then also what you want to do with it and where you want to keep it, they're going to kind of fill in the gaps that are in your process, but then let you do what you really want and need to do with that information, which is pretty cool. I feel like oftentimes with these kinds of robust solutions, it's kind of all or nothing, and Ripcord doesn't take that philosophy, which I think is makes it a lot more appealing to a wider type of user.
Great. So maybe, or if I could jump into some thoughts on future. Maybe the most tangible thing for the future will be more webinars. I think we're going to be doing a lot more of these, specifically to talk about. Today we focus kind of on that left pillar of robotic digitization, but we have so much exciting stuff going on in our recognition capabilities, the ability to extract information and connect that data to your systems, as well as on the repository. And if you haven't seen it already, we did a webinar I think a few weeks ago with our two leaders in our product organization, where they talked a little more comprehensively about these different pillars of Ripcord. So feel free to refer to that, and definitely expect more webinars to come to dive a little deeper on the technology side of our extraction capabilities and kind of that middle recognition pillar, as well as the repository.
Yeah, and when we will definitely send out the link to this recording so that all of you can kind of reference it, share it with folks on your team that might be interested. But we'll also send out a link to that webinar that Kevin just mentioned, so you can check that out as well. But to Kevin's point, we are going to do a bunch more of these. So definitely, when you get that email or in the chat window now, if there's a question or a topic or an angle about this that you would love to see us address, or that you find really interesting, or it's something you're kind of struggling with in your own organization, let us know. We're really excited to play a much more kind of educational, but also engaging role in this broader conversation around robotics, digital transformation, AI, machine learning, the whole kit and caboodle. So let us know what is most sort of compelling and relevant to all of you, so that we can kind of get your questions answered and help you and all of your organizations kind of get to that next level in this sort of digital transformation journey.
Great. And then, so webinars isn't the only thing Ripcord's thinking about for the future, but I wanted definitely to mention that we think there's some really great opportunities. I mentioned at the start of the webinar, got into a little bit around the fleet of machines, and when we think about the scale that we're trying to achieve and the benefits of that kind of IoT-esque connection of all of our devices for real-time optimization. So when you send us content, we're able to learn your content and actually perform better and create better quality results more quickly, geared towards your individual content, which is really powerful and interesting. Also, we have a lot of great building block technologies around computer vision and some of this, our machine vision engine, as well as a lot of the automation and robotics and hardware that we think can be applied to some other content types that we're actually seeing a lot of. So that's a pretty exciting area for us as well to just continue to transform that state of the art as we move forward. And then, of course, on the extracting value from these documents and this content is really what we see as the future for anybody choosing to go on a digital transformation journey for their paper or existing digital content, which we see a good amount of as well. And the power of sending that all of your content through a pipeline that's learning your content and learning your user behavior in the repository is will be incredibly powerful for our customers.
That's awesome. It's super exciting. Before we kind of wrap, we're getting close to the end of our hour. If there's any other questions that you all have for Kevin, let us know, and we'll kind of hit those before we go. But like I mentioned, we will share the link to this recording and some kind of follow-up content as well, and also the link to our most recent webinar so that you can also hear from the product side. So both Ripcord's Chief Product Officer and VP of Product Management joined us for a really, really interesting conversation from their perspective on all of this. And again, we will send out invites to future webinars and kind of more content. So as you're digging into all of this, if you've got questions, let us know. We will love to answer them. And we can, of course, put you in touch with anyone to get you a demo or dig a little bit deeper into how Ripcord can help your organization. So Kevin, thank you. I really appreciate you taking this time. If there's anything, is there anything else that you want to add about robotics and AI and kind of your view on how Ripcord is changing the shape of this industry?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about the robots today, but we have we're so excited about our roadmap and the functionality kind of in the recognition area, to be able to learn, like I said, learn a customer's content and extract meaningful value out of that and connect that into your downstream systems, and being able to pair all of these technology pillars together is really incredibly unique to Ripcord and very powerful for our customers. So leveraging kind of machine learning throughout this stack and scaling that instead of scaling people is really the power of it all. And yeah, maybe just final thoughts would be, I hope today I kind of asked the question, why robots? And it's 2019, and I think any company or partners out there that are helping build digital transformation solutions, or companies that want to take this on, and it's critical. You should be starting with the best quality document. That it's future proofed, and it's going to just best enable technology today to pull value out of those records, and in the future as well. And then the ability to do that at scale, at the speed that modern businesses require to get outcomes and realize outcomes. You should look nowhere else than Ripcord to do that work for you, and we're ready for it. So excited to take that on.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time. And thanks all of you for joining us. We'll send you the recording this afternoon or tomorrow morning, and hit us up with all the questions you've got. Hopefully we'll see you again next time.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.